What's going on, guys? I'm Dan Weichart, VP and co-founder of the Badass Patriot Company, coming to you today on this beautiful September 14th, 2023, which you guys may know is a special someone's birthday. We'll get into it. Well, again, guys, I thank you guys for joining us. If you didn't catch the hint, today is actually the 209th anniversary of the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Brief history on that one. In 1814, during the bombing of Fort McHenry during the War of 1812, which is 2 years after the war is supposed to have started. Regardless, it began in 1812. The British were bombing Fort McHenry, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. Francis Scott Key, along with others, I do believe, were sent aboard a British ship in order to on diplomatic missions, but they were captured by the British and held there during the assault on the fort. And then Francis Scott Key was inspired to write the Star-Spangled Banner as an amateur poet. He was inspired by the flag flying above Fort McHenry, which at the time, the flag somewhat like the one behind me, but that time the flag had 15 stripes and only 15 stars. Because at the time, I think they were going for the colonies that were part of the colonial U.S. at the time. So many of us have undoubtedly heard the Star-Spangled Banner before. Surely we've been to sporting events and any other really important event in the United States where you have heard the Star-Spangled Banner being sung. However, as I'll jump over here, most of the time you've probably only heard the first chunk of it, which is listed here behind me. I can even make this a little bit bigger. We can zero in on that. There we go. So you've only read this first chunk. So you guys have certainly seen that. Read that through yourself. But actually, the Star-Spangled Banner is comprised of 4 different stanzas. And I actually want to take some time to zero in on the last one, but I do encourage you guys to actually go through and read through the stanzas and understand it. If you're curious, Dinesh D'Souza has a pretty epic rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. I forget what movie he put that from, but I think it's actually called Hillary's America or something like that. And anyway, really epic rendition, encourage you that. But there's many people that have done fantastic renditions of the Star-Spangled Banner. So let me read this last piece to you, because I actually think there's a lot here that we can unpack. So first, oh, thus be it ever, when free men shall stand between their loved home and war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that had made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and of the home of the brave. It's a really tight, really powerful last stanza. So I want to kind of go through it and try to chat with you guys about it a little bit. But before I get too far into it, again, I want to thank you for being here. And a brief word for our sponsors, I guess. I want to thank you guys for being here. Firstly, if you haven't already, please drop us a thumbs up, a like on our video, comment down below. We love to hear thoughts and feedback. Whether you're watching us here on YouTube or there on Rumble, or you happen to be seeing us on Instagram, Twitter, wherever, you can find us on all social media at Badass Patriots Co. And what we also appreciate, and this is our sponsor, the whole program is of course sponsored by the company by the namesake Badass Patriots Company. Where you can slide on over to badasspatriotco.com and get some sweet t-shirts. This is probably one of my favorite t-shirts that I have from us. Same thing with the hat. Regardless of how you support us, we appreciate it. So thank you, and we'll get back into it. So as we go through this particular piece. So firstly, I'd like to point out that the whole point of this last stanza is when free men stand between their loved home and war's desolation. Well, firstly, America was founded on the idea of freedom. Now, I know that many of you who are maybe a bit cynical will chime in being, well, Dan, they held slaves during this time frame. And that is absolutely the case. But I don't think anybody today, actually, not even I don't know, I certainly don't, even as a conservative, but I've never heard any conservative voice try to whitewash America's sort of scars, let's say, or try to erase them. But rather, I think our scars bear for us an important lesson, that we were founded on freedom. However, we didn't always live up to those ideas, unfortunately. Of course, we held slaves for a long time in the country, which and then eventually fought a war to end it. And so too did the British, a little bit before us, ironically. But it was eventually rectified, and we've begun to heal from those wounds ever since, which is always lovely. But the point I want to bring up here is when you're talking about free men standing between their loved home and war's desolation, this whole stanza really begins off with a key framing of what the United States is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a land that's kind of to itself, avoiding any kind of unnecessary entanglements, per the words of George Washington. But most importantly, whenever strife and war came knocking on our door, well, gosh, free men are going to rise up and stand between it. And the stanza goes on to beseech the Lord, beseech God, the Almighty, because many people waffle about what America was founded upon. And the reality is that it was founded upon Judeo-Christian values. It is a Christian nation founded upon those principles. And many of you, don't believe. Maybe you're out there, you're not Christian, walked away from the church, or never was part of the church and don't have any desire to be. And that's okay, guys. There's no point in fighting. We're all still Americans at the end of the day. The thing I would point out to you is that even if you choose not to believe in the, for your sake, I'll say the mystical elements of Christianity, understand that from the philosophical reasonings that were born out of it is what the Western world was built upon. Judeo-Christian values. A lot of things that we take for granted are, not necessarily appropriate, or not necessarily appropriate, or not necessarily a given outside the context of a Judeo-Christian morality. An easy example here is the idea of mercy. Back in the day, amongst a lot of rulers, the idea of showing your enemies mercy, or showing your adversaries, political opponents, mercy once you came into power was not a positive trait. Often, if you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, one of my favorite movies, Russell Crowe with Joaquin Phoenix, during that one scene in that movie, Joaquin Phoenix's character, the emperor of the time, laments that whether or not he will be known as merciful. Well, given some historical context, you must understand that being known as merciful often was viewed as a sign of weakness, both from within your own country, amongst your own people, and without. So people thought that if you were merciful, that would imply weakness and potentially invite challenge. So that's one just tiny example, and I encourage you guys to go through and look through all that, because fortunately or unfortunately, the societal backbone that we're resting on, the Judeo-Christian foundation, is not obvious without the revelation of God. And that doesn't even necessarily have to boil down to the revelation of Christ specifically, although I would argue that the Christian method, if you will, for discovering the metaphysical has proven itself to be probably one of the most, if not the most, effective and correct means of doing so. But that's a whole separate topic. My point is, you don't have to believe as I do to appreciate the moral foundation that Christianity laid for the nation. And certainly in this case, how oftentimes our founding fathers and people who were instrumental in the formation of our land beseech the Lord, beseech the Almighty to preserve this land. And when we look at America in the greater scale of things, in the grand scheme of things, on the global stage, I feel, and maybe many of you, left and right, might feel the same with me, that America has sort of lost its way. That we look out at how our government and how we're represented in the world and doesn't necessarily represent the righteousness that we wish to exemplify, the righteousness that we were once founded upon. I think many people would correctly conclude that that is, unfortunately, not the case. So, nevertheless, let us move on. So then conquer we must when our cause it is just. And that really just highlights what I was just saying. I really think that it's important that Americans nowadays, more than ever, come back to the identity of what it is to be an American. Because a lot of times we zero in on this idea that America is a sort of great melting pot of cultures and peoples, and to a certain degree it is. The beautiful part is that to be an American is not tied to a racial identity in the same way that, for example, being, let's say, Japanese is tied to being specifically Japanese. It's just, and nothing against Japanese, obviously, it's just an example. Or even some of our European allies. The Danes are the Danes. The French are Franks. Englishmen are English. Scots are Scots. I know they're all white to some degree or another, but they're distinct people at the end of the day. The Polish are Poles, and so forth. But here in the United States, here in America, our identity is not tied to one particular race. It is, however, tied to an ideology, the core of which, as I've already alluded to, is Judeo-Christian values. But another key component is this idea that we, unlike a lot of other countries, purport to stand for righteousness. That when our cause is just, then there is no other option for us to actually conquer the obstacles set in front of us. Obviously our revolution in 1776 is a great exemplifier of that fact. At the time, the reign of King George was highly oppressive to the colonies, and you can simply look to our Declaration of Independence to see the enumerated complaints that were leveled toward King George at the time. But there's been times in history, thankfully, that America has fought and overcome. You can look at the American Civil War, which the very, very short version of that is in the early days, the South was very motivated and the North was very bloated with not good leadership. And the South was laying it to the North at the time. And it wasn't until the North battle-hardened leaders rose up in the North that they were able to effectively defeat the South. Just cause. I know there's a lot of debate as to was the Civil War really about slavery? But let's be honest, it's a big part of it, at the very least. So there's one example. You can look forward to World War II is another great example. Obviously, we were conquering the Nazis. At the end of the day, we had a guy who was hell bent on conquering Europe and potentially global domination. And obviously doing horrific things to his own people. We got in there and took care of business against a lot of odds. Because realistically, America had to cross an ocean, set up on England, cross a channel, gain a foothold. A lot of American men and women were killed or died as a result of our attempted invasion of Normandy back into France and the mainland of Europe. So, just a great example. Unfortunately, though, since then, I'm kind of hard-pressed to say that we found a cause that is genuinely just. I would say the Cold War, fighting against communism or trying to contain them has been a just cause, and indeed we conquered that one as well. But here recently, especially in my lifetime, the United States, especially militarily, has engaged in some activities where it's at the very least gray. It's not quite on the up and up as something as a World War II was. So I think it's important that we re-identify, the Judeo-Christian core of our country, and even if you don't happen to be a Christian, simply recognize that it is from that ideology that the morality which forms the West arose. And then when we move on, we can re-identify what it is to be American. One such example being righteousness in our causes, both personally and governmentally. I left or right, I'd say you're pretty hard-pressed to say that our government acts righteously to a large degree these days. So as we continue, I always find this particular piece interesting, kind of tying it into the Pledge of Allegiance as well. As many of you are aware, if you ever, stated the Pledge of Allegiance going through school, if you're old enough for that, you may remember there's a certain line in there: one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a lot of people like to point out that the "in God" part was added in the mid 1900s, and that it wasn't originally there. Among other important facts about, about the Pledge of Allegiance to begin with. And so many people point to this as sort of whenever I've heard it pointed out to, at least, it's always been sort of well, don't you know that the under God part was inserted there? It wasn't originally written that way. Perhaps not, but again, we're hard pressed to not look back on the history of the United States and see that the idea of beseeching the Almighty, that setting God to the high pinnacle of our society, has not been a key factor. So what this stanza really highlights for us is that when free men unite to defend their home in a just battle, with God as their focus, then the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave, forever and ever. Amen. At least that's the way I see it. So, folks, I thank you guys for joining us. That's where I'm going to leave it today on this September 14th, the 209th birthday of the Star-Spangled Banner. If you haven't already, please drop us a like and comment and subscription here on YouTube. Give us that thumbs up on Rumble. Comment there as well. Share the video with your friends on whatever platform or from whatever platform you so desire. And if you haven't already, you can find us on all social media at Badass Patriot Co. That's Badass Patriot Co. on basically every social media platform. And again, you can slide on over to badasspatriotco.com. That's badasspatriotco.com. You can grab yourself some sweet merch. And so we thank you guys for joining us. We'll catch you next time.